I am really excited to introduce Paul Gunn today. The reason why is not just because we grew up together, but because Paul Gunn is someone who has been, I guess, really at the forefront of digital marketing. He has overseen or implemented hundreds of millions of dollars of, I guess, what we call ad spend or media spend. And in this podcast, we're going to talk about AI, how things are taking over in terms of the online marketing world. It's a really good chance for me to really dig in and ask some of the big questions. So, without further ado, Paul, how are you feeling today?
I'm good, thank you. First podcast, so I'm feeling a bit nervous, but I think I'll warm into things slowly.
It never changes. It's the first couple of minutes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
After that, everything kind of settles down.
Well, because when you're on camera and you've got the lights on, it just makes everything awkward, doesn't it? It's just like, okay, it's game time. Don't swear. Don't say anything stupid.
I could promise one of those things, maybe not swearing.
Yeah, I bet. Well, I would love if you could give my listeners a bit of a background of how you got into this space and kind of what brings you up to today and being here.
Yeah, I mean, I was super lucky when I went to university. Obviously, none of this industry really existed. It was still very much at a kind of infancy stage. Facebook had just started to roll out some of their ad formats, their very basic ad formats at that time. Google was out there with search, but hadn't yet rolled out their shopping product. So I was fairly lucky, went into an internship and then fell upon building websites, weirdly, for a waste management company. And then from there started getting into the world of SEO and paid ads, and then really started kind of my career trajectory from there. Looked after CRM at a few companies, obviously paid media, affiliates, SEO, and all the other kind of bits in between, really. So it's been a really interesting journey to see how the industry's developed and how it continues to develop. It feels like we're at a real inflection point at the moment, on a number of fronts.
Well, one of the first questions I'd probably want to throw your way, as someone that has been part of building businesses online since these platforms started, what was it like when you were first getting exposed to building campaigns and building businesses to what it's like now in this age of AI? What's the kind of main differences for you?
Yeah, I think the industry's always had an element of automation within it, and I think that lends itself to being better prepared. There's always been Google spreadsheets to try and kind of insert keywords into campaigns. There's always been ways of automating some element of ad copy. I think now more than ever, those automation tools have just expanded infinitely in a lot of different areas.
And what about when people say that online marketing, while it is one of the most important things that people out there need to understand and need to have for their business, there's a lot of people that say the need for experts is nigh. Like you don't need to have someone like like an online marketing specialist, because people are saying that AI is taking over that role as well. Yeah. So you've been there from the start. You're now coming into this new modern landscape. How is it like? What's the real sentiment?
Well, I think that's true. I think where we're going is super interesting, because on the one side you've got the media platforms, and the reality of those media platforms is they're trying to get you to spend more. That's the overarching aim of Meta, Google, whoever it might be. Mm-hmm. Their platforms are designed to generate as much income from the media that they have available. You are always going to have someone on the other side of that who's acting in the interests of the business. And ultimately, a lot of the digital marketing expertise is framed as trying to get that business logic across into the platforms, to not necessarily fight against, but to try and streamline the aims of the media platform to more interact with the aims of the business, or to work with the aims of the business.
And by media platforms, you're referring to Meta, Google, exactly, TikTok.
Google. Yeah.
So you're saying when people are spending money on those platforms, they're kind of biased, right, to just spend money.
Exactly. And there's always elements of wastage in there. They will, to a certain extent, get to where you need it to be, but good marketing expertise is able to kind of trim the sides of that to be able to get the most out of that media buy. Now, will AI get more efficient? Yes, but the likelihood is that there will be efficiencies there, but not every business is going to have its own AI module that will be able to do that. So there's going to have to be some level of expertise that sits within that's able to configure those elements within the platforms. And I think that will always exist and continue to exist. In what way, I don't necessarily know. How many people are required to configure those platforms, who knows in the future. But that's definitely something that I can continue to see from a business versus media perspective.
So what are you seeing on the ground in the real world, so to speak, in terms of AI's implementation? What's actually changed for you now that AI seems to be here to stay?
I think content creation is a huge one, and you can start to see it more and more. Seeing lifestyle photo shoots be reproduced from an AI perspective. The less need for models and actual figures to be able to do things. Obviously, content creation from a text perspective is now touch of a button. So that aspect has become a lot easier, and I think that's mainly where you're starting to see the benefits for a day-to-day user is that content creation. It's no longer, you don't need necessarily a huge studio to do a photo shoot. As a small brand, you can create a on-model video with very little budget, and that can enhance your campaigns in a huge way that you might have only been able to do text ads before. And I think breaking down those barriers to entry is a super interesting thing.
Well, it's also scary. I think a lot of people listening to you say that. I mean, is it effective? Like, are people just replacing the need for the studios and the models? They're putting that content together, and it's working. Like it's.
I would say, if not working now, within the next 6 months, you will be at a point where it would be fairly indistinguishable between a model, on-shot model imagery, and an actual photo, an AI.
So then, what's your thoughts on this? If we're in a place where every business is running online marketing, because I think a business nowadays that's running online marketing, pound for pound, is going to outcompete a competitor that isn't.
Yep.
So then, all of these businesses doing all of this online marketing, using all these AI systems, surely like content is just going to be a disappearing industry because you can just make content at the click of a button. Like, where do you think we go from there?
Well, I think there's two aspects. One is good content will continue to be, and well thought out content, meaningful content will continue to be relevant. And from an ad perspective, that's where brand becomes more and more important. And that brand aspect will bind into that availability of content.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, a point of view of a brand, the styling of the brand, influencers will become more and more important because they add brand relevancy in. So that equity being passed between other brands will be super important as well.
The equity that the influencers hold because they're following?
Well, because they're following, but also their authority. If you think about if anybody can make content, trusted sources become really, really valuable. So someone that is creating real trusted content becomes very, very valuable. So if they then say, I think this brand is trustworthy and is real and has valuable content, that equity passing across by them endorsing them in some way has huge value because there's so much content out there. So I think brands are going to have to be very careful about who they associate with, and influencers will also have that real tangible impact for brands as well. Because if someone can create a brand out of anything, that brand aspect passing between brands becomes incredibly valuable.
Part of what worries me is this equity of influencers that you're talking about, this idea that, you know, if you speak about online marketing and if you're a thought leader in that space, my worry is that people are going to start creating thought leaders or influencers that are purely AI.
Yeah.
So then what I feel is going to happen is this factor where AI systems can not only predict and understand the human reaction to content, they can also create the content in the first place that will resonate better.
Yeah.
So they'll make organic influencers that are essentially AI. So you agree that that's going to happen too?
Oh, 100%. I think you can already see within the platforms users that are being created that are fully AI. There are already a plethora of AI generated influencers out in the wild. But that's what I mean about people validating that other people are real. Do you see what I mean? There's almost like an equity there that says, and does it matter if they're not real? Not necessarily, but more about, is their content authentic? Are they saying truthful things? That aspect of it. News media, sort of like all of that type of thing, those validated brands, influencers, etc., will become more and more important, I think, in the long run.
Does it scare you or excite you?
Half and half. I think it's going to be a very difficult job to manage, bearing in mind that social media companies, especially over the past few years, have gone away. Certain media platforms more than others have gone away from wanting to disseminate what's fake content and what's real content. And I think...
What do you mean? What, they're stepping away from moderating?
Yeah, they're stepping away from moderation.
Why?
I think difficult to do. Worries about censorship, I think, are probably the two biggest things. Probably censorship more than anything else. I think it's going to be very difficult to have a world where censorship isn't able to be done. There's going to have to be some level of it. Not necessarily censorship of content, but probably a moderation of who's allowed to post within a sphere, if that makes sense. Because being able to create any channel or create a channel and post content should be something that's probably moderated as to how that happens, whereas obviously it's not at the moment. And it's difficult because there's a line, and it's very, very difficult to swing one way or the other. Yeah.
I saw YouTube recently came up and said they're not going to pay creators that aren't real voices. So no AI can be used for payments. Do you think that's going to set a trend?
Possibly. Again, I think that's very difficult because how are they going to decide whether it's real or fake in the long run? I mean, there's already problems with some aspects of that now in a year. Very, very difficult to do. Very, very difficult to do. And also, if someone wants to use their voice, say for example, we did this podcast and then we wanted to do another one, but we didn't want to do it. We just thought, well, let's create it through AI.
It freaks me out, man.
Then
there's going to be an AI Mark and Paul chatting about this again in a week.
But if we chose to do that, why should YouTube not pay us, even though it's our voice? Do you see what I mean? It's a difficult thing to do. We could choose to do this podcast but not use our real voices because we don't want that out in the world. We want to be celebrities without having to reveal our identity, as it were. Why should we not get paid for that?
So then, what do you think about the idea of personal brand? Because do you think personal brand's going to become even more important because of that dynamic? Or do you think we're just going to get bulldozed by AI robots?
I think personal brand will become more and more of a thing. But only for... I mean, personal brand is only for the people that want to have a personal brand, if that makes sense. Like, people posting content to their friends, a known circle of friends is a known circle of friends. So I don't think you're going to need personal branding in that space, but it will become tougher for influencers to create that personal brand because there will be so much content out there. You know,
this is what I was wondering in your work, the campaigns you manage, you see the ad spend, you see the organic strategy, you see the brand strategy. Where does organic sit in this? Is organic still relevant, or do you think that organic social is just dying?
No, but I think organic social and those types of things will become more important than ever because people will be seeking out relevant brands and content in an absolute forest of content, right? There's going to be so much content that being able to have an authority to go to see relevant content that is produced and from a trusted source will be more relevant than ever. So I think creating a following now in social media is massively important because it is already more difficult to do than it ever has been because there's more influencers in other areas, but it will only become infinitely more difficult as profiles become more and more ubiquitous and content becomes easier and easier to produce. I
wonder whether there will be a convergence to brands using just the same content that AI is suggesting is what works the best.
Yeah, that's very true. You can see that happening, if that makes sense, of like, oh, this is working, then all of a sudden there's a flood of that content. But you look at things like the dolls that everybody was doing for a period of time, where you could turn yourself into an action figure.
Oh yeah.
It's that same thing, right? Of like, we do that now anyway as human beings because we know that drives engagement. So therefore, let's create action figures of ourselves. So I think that would happen naturally, regardless of whether it was driven by AI or people.
Well, it probably goes back to your first point about the importance now of the brand, and how people establish themselves. So in your work, on not to mention any companies, but I know that you work in very large systems, so you see what's being focused on. How much of these big businesses do you think focusing on that brand organic, like true voice development against just smashing people with millions of dollars worth of ads?
I think it varies. I think some companies are probably better at it than others. I mean, it's a fine line, I think, between the two. There are some aspects of ads and media that you need to have business objectives against. Working from a retail perspective, a lot of the work that I've done previously is about trying to get people to purchase something. So there tends to be more of a focus on the lower funnel aspect of that in terms of retargeting and Google Shopping and those type of elements. I think it will become easier to do that upper funnel piece. And brands should probably focus more on that aspect at the moment and trying to get follower growth, email lists, all of that type of stuff. Because it won't be, now is probably the easiest it will be, and it'll only continue to get harder as times go on. It'll always be technically easy to do retargeting because you're targeting people who already engaged with the site and come back. But trying to cut through into media for that upper funnel activity, I think will become harder and harder unless you build a voice now.
When it comes to businesses, whether they're massive established companies or whether they're just starting out, what do you think, in your experience, the biggest misconception is about online marketing?
That's interesting. I would probably say the biggest misconception, I would probably say that it's probably doing myself a disservice here, that it's overly complicated and that it can't be configured to be good for your business, no matter how big or small your business is. I think there's a place for online marketing within every type of business, or that online marketing isn't relevant for me because I'm X or Y. I'm a brand that doesn't have an online presence, so it's not relevant to me. I think that's a common misconception that I've seen.
Do you think there's any kind of business that really doesn't need?
Yeah, I think even if you don't have an online presence, you look at things like, or you've just got a physical presence, you look at things like maps and those aspects. As we go into the world of AI and ChatGPT and language models, there are going to be recommendations within that are going to be for service-led things and other elements that it's super important to still have an aspect of or be involved in that recommendation engine. So I don't think there's a brand type necessarily. It might be even organic. You don't necessarily have to pay for it either. But for getting your online presence can be a real downfall because even going to a physical store normally starts with some kind of digital footprint on a phone for directions, whatever that might be. So without that marketing aspect of it or organic aspect of it, you can miss out in a big way.
I think it's going to stretch to ChatGPT too, because people now are having more and more conversations with these AI systems. They're asking it what hotels to stay at. They're asking what food to eat. It doesn't seem like a big stretch to think that soon these AI systems are going to be asking businesses to pay them money to have favourable rankings in searches.
Yeah, the paid aspect of it is super interesting. And how maybe it's a cocktail mix being you pay more to have more favored results. You know, you get that sometimes in things like product recommendation engines at the moment. So I think that will become a bigger part.
What's a product recommendation engine? Is that like Google Shopping or something?
Like a e-commerce site. So you have a kind of a what we'd call a cocktail mix, where you go, I want products with a higher margin to appear higher than anything else,
and it's just like random. Yeah.
So you'll put that in, and it will say, right, okay, out of these search results, I'll make sure that these products with higher margin are. It's kind of similar, I guess, to bidding within an auction for Google. You know, you're putting in your bid, and then it's saying, right, okay, based on the input and your bid, this is where I'm going to place you. So I can see probably ChatGPT going down that road. It's just like,
how do you make it fair? Because at least when you're going into Google, you can pay your money, you can see the auction prices, you can see how you're ranking. I just think it's going to be interesting to pick your brain on this, because there's no way, I'm sure, there's no way in hell that those guys running Claude and Perplexity and ChatGPT, there's no way they're not sitting there thinking, hold on a minute. Like the competitive advantage right now in your restaurant or your dental practice or your whatever, like showing in ChatGPT against your competition is going to get more and more and more intense. And then they're going to have a problem, because number one, it might be unfair in terms of like they have a market bias towards something which isn't cool. And then if they want to have an element of transparency so people can bid for it, it's like, I just don't know how it would work. But do you agree it's going to go that way?
I love that you think there's an element of fairness in it, but you have to take complete, like,
why
do you, because Google, for example, with the best will in the world, there's no aspect of fairness necessarily. There might be terms that they don't let you bid on, for example, but there's no aspect of fairness in their bidding. If you're willing to bid high enough, they're not looking at it going, oh, it's super unfair because they're a really small business, so we're going to let them go above you.
All right, but what if I was trying to sell cookies and you were trying to sell cookies?
Yep.
And I was bidding like £1 for the keyword cookies and you were bidding £2. Like, I'm sure Google wouldn't charge you the £2 because the nearest bid's 1. So Google would charge you like £1 and 1p. So there's fairness in that sense, no?
Well, no, because it would look at the quality score of both of us and go, who's the most relevant for that keyword? And who is now what it might go is, I'm less relevant, but because I've put £2, I'll get charged £2 and you'll get charged £1 for that click.
So you're saying that they'll spend the money where they can spend the money, basically?
No, they're essentially charging you for not being relevant, because it cares most about, to a certain extent, delivering good results. So if you're willing to pay to brand competitor keywords is a good example of this, right? Like, if I could be bidding $30 and you could be bidding 36p, because those are two different currencies, so we'll ignore that. But
we got Mark's cookies,
and
Paul's cookies,
yeah,
and you're bidding on Mark's cookies.
I'm bidding on Mark's cookies. It will still charge me a huge amount more than you, because you are super relevant for that keyword, and I'm just trying to intrude in that space. So as long as I'm willing to pay.
Sounds fair to me.
Yeah. To a certain extent, that is fair.
Well, here's a better question then. What is it in your experience that's unfair? Like, what do you see as being not fair in the Google AdWords space?
Well, if I'm a huge business, even though I'm irrelevant, I'm still allowed to come along and bid on your keyword, even though that's your brand.
So you can just dominate the competition with loss leading exercises?
Yeah. And it might not even be that loss leading for me. But you can take up space in other people's platforms. They make it in a way that it's not easy to do. And it's interesting that there's certain industries that it is just done. You look at broadband, telecoms, that type of stuff. It's everybody's bidding on everybody else to try and steal customers. Retail, probably not as much as it has been, but there are some elements of it that you can see.
It sounds like a digital war. It's like a cyber war, because how do you win that if people are surely you're all just mutually destructive because you're all just bidding each other up?
Yes, to a certain extent. You're not meant to call a truce, so that's a bit difficult.
What do you mean?
You're not allowed, technically, I can't remember if it's in the terms and service or whether it's just frowned upon, to agree to set bids at a certain level.
And that's what Google tells you because they don't want to get...
Well, yeah, because they don't want you all going, hey, instead of it being $30, you will just agree to keep it at £2.50 because...
Because otherwise, if you're bidding on Mark's cookies and I'm bidding on Paul's cookies, if we just fight, we're just going to end up bidding each other up to...
Yeah, and who wins in the end?
So they try and say you're not allowed to talk to each other.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of not price fixing, but yeah, it's against the terms of service, I'm pretty sure, to say we're only going to bid this for this keyword.
That's fascinating. Well, I guess it's not like everyone in the world can all agree and turn around and say,
well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, within an industry, you could do it, but it's not easy to do. But yeah, I think from an LLM perspective, and we were talking about ChatGPT and that element, the bidding way will make the most sense for it because it will be able to determine the context of the question and go, okay, cool, there's all of these brands that are interested in that contextual question, and therefore I'll spit out these recommendations.
God, it'd be like you'd have to put variations of prompts that you want to show up for into the...
Well, you think about broad match keywords, it's like I want to appear in the context of football kits. And you go, okay, I want to appear for football kits, and it will go, cool. It's smart enough to realise the context of what someone's asking and put the relevancy of that category within. So it's not beyond the scope, but there are a number of ways of them monetizing that platform. It could be that, it could be wanting commission on sales, it could be there's loads and loads of different ways of them monetizing that platform. So it'll be super interesting to see the direction that they go. There's some inklings of ways that they're going to start doing it, but it would be very interesting the way that it starts to go.
So do you think SEO is going to have a massive resurgence? Because I would have thought that the way these LLMs understand what you do is by understanding your website and the website schema and all of that.
Yeah, exactly that. There is an interesting trend now within SEO for LLMs, and you look at, so what we've been looking at recently, or there's been a trend towards, is how things like Reddit posts can actually quite interestingly influence LLMs because they use that social proofing for recommendations and things like that. Google's obviously indexing Reddit results as well, so that can be quite a useful tool to be able to use from an SEO perspective. The other problem is that content is becoming more and more easier and easier to produce, especially from a text perspective. So you've also got that thing of it has to trust something over something else. So recognizing what it's trusting and becoming one of those trusted sources is, again, going to be really, really important.
And is that why it goes to places like Reddit? Because it's like a domain with authority?
Yeah.
And they go,
well, I don't even think it's a domain with it is a domain with authority, of course, but it's using people's posts within that domain to be the validation of what's important and what's relevant, which is a bit dangerous, but at the same time is a good way. It's a similar way to Google backlinks in that it's using people linking to other websites as an authority to say, I, an authority, think that this is also an authority because I'm linking to it from my website. So therefore, the more links that you get, the more relevant it sees you within that contextual space.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm with you.
I don't think it'll be much different to that. I don't think that's, in my mind, their only real way of disseminating what content's important and not important. Yeah.
Here's a question for you. You've overseen and you've implemented hundreds of millions worth of ad spend. What do you think the biggest mistake is that people make with ad spend?
I think not aligning it to a bit, like not having clear KPIs from what you're trying to get out of that ad spend is super, super important. You need to know whether you're trying to target return on ad spend, whether you're trying to get more impressions, whether you're trying to drive traffic to your website. What is the aspect that you're actually trying to get out of that, and how are you going to measure it? Are you going to measure it in platform? Are you going to measure it through a mixed media modeling platform? A lot of the problems that I see within businesses are that they're trying to measure things with and not understanding the limitations of what they're measuring, if that makes sense. They're measuring it in platform, and they're saying, okay, well, Facebook is telling me that I've generated $100,000 without knowing the limitations of that measurement platform, and that it's only measuring itself. It's not looking at all the other elements that can come into a sale on a website. So I think that's really, really important.
What about businesses who say, I don't want to measure lots of different key performance indicators, I just want to measure ROAS? Because for most businesses, they spend $1, they want to get $3, $4, $5 back. Surely that's the only important metric. Why do you say one of the biggest mistakes is this kind of KPI measurement thing?
Well, yeah, I think ROAS is fantastic, and it is great because it will drive you to a profitability index within a certain aspect, but you're always going to have a ceiling to that. And if you want to drive growth for a brand, you're going to have to get into an area of very low ROAS, whereby you're going into impressions or visits to be able to fill some kind of conversion funnel. I think some of the success that I've really seen recently is using that upper funnel aspect, for example, to drive leads and then look at the long-term lifetime value of those leads rather than necessarily focusing on the ROAS. You can have a look at, I spent $1,000 and actually I've driven 100 customers that have a lifetime value of $100 each. So, I'm 10K up. So it's that aspect that you can start getting into. Not to say that ROAS is wrong. I think a lot of businesses starting off can really focus in that as you're trying to grow share of a market.
But at the bigger level, a blind focus on ROAS in your experience is...
Yeah, you can get very, very blinkered to a certain extent within that aspect, especially if you're measuring within a platform. Like if you've got a more of a mixed media view, there's more options for you to understand the top of the funnel.
When you say, like, what do you mean by that mixed media view? What is mixed media modeling?
Yeah, so there's mixed media modeling versus attribution modeling. So attribution modeling is looking at what's happened to a customer within a certain aspect of a journey, tracking at a customer level.
So that's like customer went to the website, they bought after clicking within 7 days. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly that. But in order to have a look at that, you really want to have the full path of that journey. So opened an email. So if someone opened an email and then searched for your brand, and then you clicked on a paid ad from that search, you'll think that your paid ads are actually driving loads of relevancy, whereas people are actually opening the email and then searching for the brand. I do that all the time. Open it on my phone and then go and search for it. What mixed media modeling does is looks more at a holistic view of, okay, well, you sent an email 3 days ago and then you saw an hour or two later a big spike in revenue. So therefore it starts to correlate those two things together and gives you an overall view of how your media buys are affecting your revenue at a more modeled state rather than necessarily the individual customer aspect that the attribution gets down to.
So how does that work? I assume this is when tracking becomes vital in terms of your tracking infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, tracking is becoming more complex, more difficult to do compliantly.
Why?
Cookie consent is obviously a huge aspect of that, and the moves that the European Union have made it more difficult. Well, not more difficult, but more important to stay compliant within that. I think everybody's getting slowly annoyed by a cookie banner appearing every time you visit a different website. So maybe there's a long-term view of how that gets done, but that's the way that it is at the moment. And I think the US is slowly now coming up to speed with that point as well. There's been some litigation recently in the US, so slowly I think it'll become more mandated, or to a certain extent is now more mandated, that you will have to have the relevant cookie banners, you have to observe consent, etc., etc. So I think having that tracking set up in the correct, compliant way is more difficult than ever. You would connect all of your media into that system, and that acts as your source of truth to be able to measure your revenue. Google obviously has, within GA4, you've got attribution. Mm-hmm. That is more of a linear view, though, of people are having to click, right, for it to be able to get that data. Facebook has, to a certain extent, some attribution, but only within itself. So it's always going to mark its own homework to a certain extent. And knowing the disadvantages of all of the different ways of measuring means that you can be more effective with your buys, because you understand what the platforms are telling you. The classic example is, you could, if you were measuring all of the platforms on their own, your website could take 100,000, but each platform will tell you that it took that 100,000. So your all of the platforms will add up to 500,000, say, if you've got 5 platforms, but you'll still have only taken 100,000. You're like, well, hang on a second.
I love that.
This doesn't add up.
Because they're all marking their own homework.
Exactly. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's normally the way that it works, right? Is everybody's saying that they've driven the sale.
So that's like me seeing a TikTok ad, Googling the product, getting hit with a search ad.
Yeah, or a meta ad, yeah. And
TikTok says, I got that sale. Google says, I got that sale. And I also happened to see an ad on Meta a week ago, and it goes, I got that sale.
Yeah, exactly.
So 3 guys are saying
and they all contributed to it. That, like, sales are very rarely linear. Do you know, like, maybe there's some, there are some aspects that are like, I'll buy it now. Do you know what I mean? But it's very much more complex. There's a lot of content that's absorbed. You might be YouTubing the best product that's out there. So that aspect of it can't be underestimated in terms of just thinking it's a linear. Search is obviously at the bottom of the funnel. So by the time that you've done all of that aspect, for example, I'm looking for some golf clubs at the moment. I will have done a huge amount of research, and then I might say, I want to buy this particular golf brand. Now, at that point, all of the retailers are up for grab, or all of the retailers will try and get me to buy it from them. So ultimately, yes, there's that bottom of funnel. But if you think about all of the content that I've consumed before I've got to that search, there's a huge amount of aspects in terms of touch points to be able to try and intercept me.
So then, do you think that it's such a grey area that it's almost impossible to correctly attribute what channel generated what part of the sale?
Yes, I think to the level of degree that you have absolute certainty, yes, 100%. I think in a world where tracking is becoming more difficult, yes, it is more and more difficult to say with 100% certainty, but having a idea of what is driving value for you, whatever that might be, value in terms of brand equity, value in terms of traffic, etc., is really, really important. It's still not a case that you need to be at a level of hoping that it works, but going into it knowing how you're going to track it and accepting that you might not have 100% accuracy in its value or media buy value is something that I think you have to be aware of.
Here's something I wanted to run past you. These AI campaign systems, PMax in Google, Advantage Plus in Meta. Do you think that these platforms more and more, as humans just trust them more and more, do you think they're just going to become little credit card swiping machines, in the sense that if an Advantage Plus or a Google PMax is going to be running, it's so easy for those platforms, assuming the tracking's set up properly, to just keep retargeting warm audiences, and like keep getting people who are already aware or already going to buy, Paul's cookies. Yeah. And these platforms are just going to spend your money really just like hitting warm users. There's a lot of sentiment in the industry now that seems to be happening. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, no, and I think that is ultimately, again, where you need digital marketing expertise, is to know that that's happening and to therefore set the campaigns up to not do that, or to do it in a way where you can manipulate your budget between those two things. Google have obviously seen, I think, the meta model where there's less control over things like ad type formats and things like that, but people will still just throw it in there and it'll appear in marketplaces and all of the different areas that Meta have, and have very successfully monetized some of the things that were very much more difficult to monetize for Google, i.e. things like Gmail, all of their display network that wasn't getting as much uptick as their search campaigns were. The difficulty is that some of that network cannot be as useful or as profitable as search. So when you're going into those areas, you need to understand that PMax, for example, can very much hunt brand campaigns or brand terms from a search perspective unless you set it up properly. And it can look fantastic, whereas actually it's only targeting people that are already looking for your brand. So if you're trying to drive growth and top line relevancy, it's not going to be doing well. You might be able to tailor it to do that in the long run, but it's not going to be doing that out of the box necessarily.
So with all the noise of these different campaign types, different platforms, what is actually working in your experience? Like brass tacks, what actually works when it comes to online marketing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is obviously Google. The intent that goes alongside search is super important. If someone's looking for cookies, as we were talking about earlier, there is a scale of people that are looking for cookies that you can't go above, but they're still looking for cookies at that relevant point in time, and understanding search and how it can be worked for your business is really, really important. I think after that, going into the different platforms and understanding the media type that they have.
What do you mean by media type?
Or the demographics, should I say, probably. The demographics that they have, the media or the different ad formats that they have available and the benefits of them is really, really important, and how you can tailor your creative for those ad formats.
So you're thinking like the difference between YouTube Shorts and long form?
Yeah, you've got YouTube Shorts, you've got 30-second videos, even things like Pinterest. So, in certain verticals, for example, for research around painting and decorating, for example, Pinterest is absolutely massive. So you want to be able to think about how that media buy might work for that, because it could just be that your vertical is actually something that has a huge interest in Pinterest, much more of a female demographic as well. So if you're trying to target that demographic, it could be really important. So understanding the dynamics of the different ad platforms and what they're used for is really, really important. And then how you tailor your creative on top of that to get the most from it. I think brands that go into it and say, right, okay, well, we've got our 10-second video, and that 10-second video will go across all media channels, aren't going to be able to make the most of your individual or your media buy. And where you can now do that content creation and create 10 different videos for 10 different media platforms, that should be the direction that you go, because that cost has come down infinitely because of all of the things we were talking about earlier about creating content through AI and things like that.
Do you think that in some ways the competitive advantage is going to be the people that pay attention to the content, the creative and the idea?
Yes.
Because the systems that are running the ads are going to become more and more kind of aligned and similar?
I don't necessarily know whether that will happen. The reason that I say that is that the demographics that are using them are all different. So like there is very much and this is based on some historic knowledge, things might have changed, but there's a trend of the older generation, probably our generation, using Instagram and Facebook because that's what we've always used and we're posting things on there. Younger generation is way more in tune with Snapchat and TikTok, for example. So their ways of displaying content and the algorithms that go alongside it will probably divert because of those changes in demographics and the way that people are consuming content differently within those different platforms.
Fascinating. I always thought the best thing to do would be split your budget across all the different platforms and just see which one gets the conversions.
But if you're going into let's say you're in the gaming industry, there is not the audience for a gaming industry is less within Meta, let's say, but Twitch, huge relevancy, and TikTok and YouTube Shorts also have a huge amount of gaming content within them. To be fair, so does Instagram Reels as well, but let's say that. You don't want to waste your spend in other areas. There's no point. Yes, you might set up between those different areas, but you probably don't want to go into Pinterest, for example, because that's just not going to drive the relevancy for you. So you could test and learn, but there's a finite budget for everybody, and especially smaller brands. So I think you just want to be, it might not be an option. And you also have to be willing to put enough money in to do the test. That's the other thing that I often see people do is kind of say, okay, I've got $1,000 budget. What I'm going to do is split that $100 across 10 different platforms. Is $100 really going to be enough to run a proper test? No. You'd be much better off taking that $1,000, selecting the ad platform that you think is most relevant, and spending the $1,000 and doing a true test to say it does work and it's great, or it doesn't work, because $100 isn't enough to actually get that test done. I think you've got to be very careful about that aspect as well.
Tough question, but how much is enough?
It depends on what you're trying to achieve, whether you're doing retargeting and things like that.
Well, maybe
I wouldn't do a test necessarily for any brand, and again, period of time is also a big thing, you know. But I think if you're going to spend probably about $5,000 in a month, but I'm coming from bigger brand ideals, if that makes sense. So my in my head, I'm saying $25,000 a month is the minimum, but I'm also coming at it from an aspect of, as you say, millions and millions and millions of dollars spent. So like $25,000 in a month is a fractional amount for probably for a business. And again, it depends whether it's a small regional business who's just trying to direct some traffic to a small, or target people in a small area, or whether I'm trying to target the whole of the UK.
Well, I imagine for people listening, whether they run a business themselves or whether they're thinking about doing some online marketing, you might hope that you spend a small amount of money on each platform and see what the benefit is going to be. Here's a good example. Like you said, the gaming industry is not on Meta, it's on Twitch, right?
Yep.
So we would assume that if you're going to run some ads on Twitch, you're going to get probably a better result than when you go on Meta. So if your advice is to take the £1,000 and run it on Meta, I would assume that there's a point where you spend your first pound, your second, your third. Is there not a point where you go, hold on a minute, something's not working? Or do you think £1,000 is like kind of a minimum to get enough data in to actually make a...
Yeah, and again, it's so difficult because how much traffic is that going to get you? You've got a load of variables that are going to come into it as to what that's actually going to drive for you as a business. So I think you would have to take it really on a case-by-case basis. And what's your objective? Are you trying to get one sale? Are you trying to sell something that's $100,000, in which case spending $1,000, that's going to be difficult? Or are you trying to get something that's costs $1, in which case, actually $1,000, yeah, you should definitely be able to get some insights for that. So there's so many variables that go, what's that minimum viable spend?
I see what you mean, because if you're selling yachts and you've got 30 grand,
a grand is going to be going to be nowhere near enough. But
Mark's Cookies isn't going to do.
Yeah, Mark's Cookies, 1,000, you might get the business off the floor. So there's a lot of variables that come into it. So I think it's very difficult to say.
Well, it's also a common question, isn't it? Because people want to know, like, how quickly can I get an answer, because they don't want to waste money. And I think it's also fair to say a lot of people listening who might have had experience running online ads, they think maybe it's a scam or it doesn't work because they've spent some money and kind of nothing happened. And like you say, maybe these platforms are often more interested in spending people's money than necessarily putting the results first. But
you have to test and learn. I mean, I've been proven wrong many times by running tests. That doesn't necessarily mean the test was not worth it, because then I know what does not work for that business. And there's trying to, it's very unlikely that you'll run a campaign that'll be like hugely successful off the bat and you're like, wow, the targeting was spot on immediately out of the box. What you're going to have to do is probably run 10 tests to learn what's wrong so that you can slowly work out what's right. So I think you have to build that almost into your budget, because if you don't, and you wind up just trying to shoot a shot and say it has to work, you're never going to be successful. You're always going to wind up going, oh, I spent half the money and it didn't work, so I'm never going to do it again. And that's not necessarily what's going to get you results.
Well, it's a good segue to a question I got from someone on Patreon, and they wanted me to ask you, if they've run online marketing and it isn't working, how do you work out what's broken between the product, the message, or the ads?
So they've run some digital marketing spend and they're trying to work out where the breakage point is.
Yeah, so they spent a bunch of money on ads, didn't sell anything. And now they're trying to think, well, what is it, and how do I tell? Is there something wrong with my product, something wrong with my message, or is there something wrong with it?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing you want to look at is how much of a click-through rate or how much traffic have you driven to the website. If you haven't driven any traffic, then clearly the messaging within the ad platform is your problem. So have you reached a threshold of going, I've got a decent amount of traffic to my website? Most conversion rates for websites are going to be based in the percentiles, right? You would have an absolute flying business if you had a 20% conversion rate, but you've still got to then drive 5 visits to get a conversion. So are you actually driving enough traffic that it's going to make sense that you would have had a conversion? And I think some businesses forget that to a certain extent. If you've driven 1,000 visits and haven't had a conversion, then you probably want to look at, okay, what's wrong? Is there an issue with my website? A huge amount of people don't just do the simple click test of, oh, I'm going to quickly demo my ad and click through to my website and go, oh, there's a huge pop-up that appears over the screen that I can't close, or something like that aspect. So always make sure as you're running your campaigns, you do an end-to-end test to go, is there anything that's going to block this as I run through, or something that's going to stop a user from interacting with it? If those two things haven't happened, and the dwell times you're looking at, your bounce rate and your interaction time, if those two things are up, then you probably want to have a look at the product and what might not be working. And again, double check that there's nothing within the basket or something. If you see a lot of people adding to basket and they're not converting, is it that there's something in the basket that's stopping them? Shipping rates could be, or something like that. So it's following the steps of where is the biggest blocker happening. Could be that there's 2 things within that process flow that's actually stopping someone purchasing. The other thing that I think is important as you start running these tests is period of time. As we talked about before, it's very unlikely that someone is going to go click buy. So you need to run over the course of a period of a couple of weeks. And again, if you're buying a yacht, someone might not buy for 6 months. So you can't run your ads and a week later go hugely unsuccessful. You're going to have to run for a sustained period of time, factor that into your budget. And to a certain extent, you should know. A lot of the ad platforms and analytics platforms will already tell you before you run online marketing, if you're a retailer, what's the average time between first visit and purchase. That's the minimum normally time that you're going to have to run ads for. Most likely, if you're running ads and they're cold leads, it will take longer than that aspect to be able to purchase. So I think making sure that you factor that in as well in terms of success, and don't just go, oh, it's been 3 days and I haven't got a sale. That those people might come back in a week and actually start purchasing, and you won't attribute them back to your advertising because you're not running it anymore.
It's a great answer. I love that. Here's one for you. If you had £1,000 to run online marketing for a new business, what would you not do?
I think I mean, and I don't want to bash any formats, and I think that the PMAX and things like that are very good for companies that can't necessarily afford digital marketing expertise. But I would be wary of throwing things into one of those automated services that's kind of a one size fits all. You can have a hit, don't get me wrong. Sometimes it'll be great and it'll add some value. But I think you've got to be very careful about what that will mean from a long-term perspective as well. Are you adding? You might get one sale, or let's say for devil's advocate, you get 2 ROAS out of that. The only way of necessary, so then you've got 2 people in your email list, but then you've got to spend that money again to generate the next sales and the next sales. I think there's a lot of value now in. Or if it was me, using that 1,000, I would probably put it into some kind of lead gen campaigns. Because if I can get let's say it cost me £1 per lead, I'll have 1,000 people then that I can actively go out to email and try and build sales. And I can go to them 3, 4, 5 times maybe if I'm lucky before you get some unsubscribes. So it's way more likely that I'll be able to generate some revenue out of those people than necessarily I would be able to if I was spending £1,000 in an ad platform. maybe search as well. I'd say maybe search. If there's some elements of search that I might be able to get after, I might do that as well.
Well, I knew we were going to get into the technicals of this, and for a lot of people listening who have had a bit of experience with online marketing or running ad spend, some of the answers you've given today are just they're brilliant. I think this is what I wanted to do. I want to kind of share your knowledge and put it out there to the world, because I know how helpful it's been to me, and I know how helpful it's going to be to others. This is a tricky question. I'll ask it anyway. Like, where do you think people should be paying attention over the next couple of years? Lots of people are a bit disenamored by AI. They're worried about it. Like, where do you think it's going to go now as we look in the next sort of 2 to 5 year window?
That's a very, very difficult question, because I've been surprised about how quickly it has how quick it's progressed. And I think initially it will be a tool for us all to use. And I think you have to be able to recognize that fact and think about, in a way, it's an extreme spreadsheet, if that makes sense. Being able to use a spreadsheet is super, super important within business, and it's another utilization tool that you can use at the moment. It's still ideation is still having to come from the user. So you're still having to say, oh, by the way, I'd like you to create this. I'd like you to create that. It will be interesting as that shifts into maybe it being able to do some more ideation for the user. But I know you're starting to see this anyway within businesses, but businesses will also have their own LLMs that aren't the ubiquitous public access ones.
You think businesses are going to build their own GPT versions?
Those are already out there. Some of the big businesses already have their own kind of chat GPT versions within.
Why would you make your own?
Because it has your own branding, it has your own HR resources in it, it has all of your documentation that you can then say to it, oh, can you go and do this for me? And it's not feeding someone else's
because
whatever you put into ChatGPT is immediately ingested into that. And there's already been a couple of faux pas by, I can't remember, I think it might have been Hyundai or someone like that, who had accidentally put plans of some vehicle or something like that into ChatGPT. That is immediately ingested by the model and then used over and over and over again.
That's scary. I don't think people are aware of that. Yeah. So anything that we upload or put into ChatGPT can be repurposed and given to other users?
Yeah. I mean, there have been, as far as I'm aware, some instances of people accidentally getting other people's like medical information, for example, because they've put it in and then it's been re-ingested back to other people by accident. It's scary. Anything that you put in there is ultimately used for learning. That's what it's based on. And from a company perspective, you have to be very, very careful about what, never put any financial information into it, etc., because that information could be used by any other system, right? Well, any other user. Now, it might not be displayed verbatim for what you've put in, but it's in that model. So you've got to be very careful. That's why companies building their own models, and it could be based on the architecture of ChatGPT, but then what your individual employees are putting into it is owned and used by the company.
And it kind of makes sense, because if you had 20 cookie companies all uploading their financial statements, then GPT, even if it's not pulling direct data from a direct company, it still might be able to inform a user of like what a typical margin per cookie is, or what a typical whatever is. So I kind of see what you mean by that. And I feel like that's going to be a kind of common denominator world where everyone's going to use it more and more. And I'll tell you something that freaks me out. I don't like the debates that are happening in the world now, because everyone's putting their own arguments through ChatGPT. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah.
And I feel like if I've got to have a bit of a debate with someone, and if I'm running my ideas through ChatGPT without enough nuance and context, and they're doing the same thing, and we're just like building our own biased, unnuanced, and clear models off our own argument, and then we basically just have two of our own like robots fighting against each other in an argument.
I understand exactly what you mean. Here's another interesting thought for you. what will happen to like expertise? Because I've often thought about this, right? So I'm at a business and I'm kind of inputting stuff into the model, etc., and helping it learn, but also refactor things for me, etc. Does the business then really care if I leave? Because I've trained the model to be able to replicate the work that I'm doing. So if I now say I'm going to take my expertise elsewhere, they're like, well, you've put it into the model anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Does that not petrify you?
To a certain extent, yes. I just find it super interesting. And like,
you find it super interesting.
No,
so
I do, because it's like
I've spent my whole life becoming. You are one of the experts of this field. Like you've been there since the start. You've built up over decades of experience. You are one of the people in this market and this industry who just. You're one of the people around the world go to know the real shit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now you're telling me that you have a genuine concern that you've been training a model.
No, I haven't been. What I can foresee in the future is that aspects of it, if that makes sense. So like if you're working for a company and you're training into a model, where does that leave the user? As like, what value does that user add? Now my value is more, or my perceived value is more around business elements and refactoring media campaigns to fit the values of the business. All businesses are different. They're trying to get different objectives out of it. So that's not as linear necessarily as some other areas, but it's fair. And I think that's why, content creators and things and other aspects in that field are so enraged by the fact that all of their work has already been put into these models. Mm-hmm. Because that's very easy for them. That's their IP.
Do you know News Daddy? Do you know that guy on TikTok?
I don't know.
A guy called I think Dylan Page.
Right.
He tells the news every day.
Yeah.
It's one of the most famous TikTokers. But people have just put his stuff through AI systems, and now there's like News Baby and News Grandma and News Kitten or whatever. And you imagine this kid's just like fuming because all of his work that he's putting in is just getting regurgitated out into AI.
But are all of those things better for his brand centrally?
Yeah, probably. but like with Dylan Page, how much of a stretch is it to pick up the front page of the newspaper, take his image and his voice and generate an AI video? Just like this podcast now, they could take your voice that's been recorded on this lovely equipment. You got your face on 3 different cameras.
Yeah.
And you've been training this AI machine at your work for however many years. So how much of a jump is it for them to be like, let's get Paul Gunn's voice, Paul Gunn's face, and we're just going to generate just like it'd be like having you on Zoom.
Yeah.
How did people know you're real right now?
No, but that's a joke. Like, there have already been fraud cases of people generating CFOs, right? And going on a call and going, hey, I need you to send $1 million to this person.
That's a great idea.
And then
has that already happened?
Oh yeah, that's already that's already. There's been a couple of cases of that already happening. So it's an ever-changing landscape that you've got to try and figure out, I think, over there. And nobody has the answers. Nobody knows really where the limit of what we currently have is, or what the new models look like. Because at the moment, as I said, it's not necessarily ideating, but is there a model out there that is ideating? Possibly, that's not released to the public. It's just, it's a fascinating space. Not only from from a ads perspective, but also from an e-commerce perspective and like the other areas that I work in. It's
what do you mean by that?
In that, as these models progress, is there going to be a place for a e-commerce website in the future? Because will someone ever really want to go and like have to visit a e-commerce website to actually transact, or are they just going to be like, what are the best golf clubs that are available at the moment? And then it will go, oh, what are you trying to get from this? You fill in like a series of questions, answer a few things about yourself, and then it will go, oh, I think this one's really good.
It would still need to read that from a site somewhere, though.
Yes, so the content is still viable, but will they ever come off that LLM to actually transact?
Well, because you could have a little iframe window in there where it just pulls data from
it already have your credit card information. You just click a button and it will send it to your house. So like, in that aspect, will there ever be? It will, in my view, it will move probably more to a ability to transact anywhere, if that makes sense. Kind of going, okay, well, I'm here and I want to be able to buy something. You'll be able to buy from whatever space or element that you're in, and the actual value of a e-commerce website will slowly fade. You're already seeing that slightly with things like marketplaces, social commerce, and that side of things. And then it'll likely come back again because everybody will want kind of a brand space and want to feel ingrained. So it's a real interesting mix at the moment.
Well, I guess I've got to ask in summary of this, with all the insights you've given, I'm going to rewind the clock right back to the first question and the title of this podcast. Be honest with me. Are you excited or are you terrified?
I think it's a definite mix of excited and terrified.
Summarize why you feel both the emotions.
I think excited because if you look at it from a perspective of, well, like a changing landscape of business, I think it's an amazing opportunity for productivity, and it's an amazing opportunity for growth and knowledge. You look at, I've got 2 boys, and I think there is the access to knowledge. If you thought the internet was access to knowledge, now that is the growth of that is exponential. Teaching is going to be fascinating going forwards and things like that. I think the terrified bit of it is, seeking truth from fiction and the ability to create content that's not that looks real and isn't real, is a fascinating line that everyone's going to have to tread. And I think censorship will be brought up again and again and again, because there's going to have to be some element of it, or the trusted news source that I spoke about earlier. So I think it's just, no one really knows the way that it will go, and I think it's everybody feeling their way around that aspect. It will undoubtedly be very different for our children, for the next generation that are trying to get into work and things like that, but learning how to utilize those tools for our advantage is only going to be better for everybody. So yeah, there's both, I think.
Paul, on that note, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. This was a great episode. We'll do it again soon.